Hello there, it's Lauren Elizabeth with Lauren Elizabeth Animal Art. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a pet and wildlife acrylic artist and instructor. I give encouragement, hope, and creative instruction to artists battling anxiety, depression, and addiction using what I'm learning and what I've come to learn about acrylic animal art. And I have another very special real-time tutorial for you today of an African gray bird. Now, in a very playful and abstract way, I'm going to show you how I rainbowify bird feathers. And just a quick reminder, on National Dog Day, that's August 26th, I'll be launching my fresh new collection of prints in my Etsy shop, so stay tuned for that. All right, creatives, let's get painting. All right, creatives, so I have a link to the traceable needed for this tutorial down below, along with a full list of materials, the Arteza brushes I'm using, and right now I'll go through the paint colors. There's cadmium yellow and orange. This is violet, followed by Phthalo Blue, raw umber, black, followed by titanium white. Now later in this tutorial, I'll also be using bright aqua green, permanent red, fluorescent blue, and fluorescent pink. Lots of yellow. I'll start with my cadmium yellow, without getting it into my violet. And a little bit of orange. We'll start with that at the top. I'll also mix some white in there. I'm going to add more yellow because I just want enough of it to get around the sides as well. Okay, and then I'll just pick up some of that and pull in lots more orange and some yellow. All right, so we'll be using these two colors. We'll start with the light and then blend it in around our bird to the bottom. I'm going to use my size 10 angle brush for this, clean and damp. If you're new to my tutorials, when I say clean and damp, that means I wash up my brush, get it really clean in my cup of water, and then I pat it damp, not dry, not sopping wet on my cloth or paper towel. Now I'm going in with the first vibrant yellow that we mixed up. I'll start at the top, get to about midway on this bird, and then start blending in my orange. Now, I always like to connect some hope to my paintings, and for today's Bible verse, it's Galatians 5, verse 1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. So stand firm, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Now, another way I like to reset and get my mind right is by deep breathing. So let's take in 5 deep breaths in and out, in through our noses, out through our mouths. Just release any of those negative emotions, those toxic thoughts. We're going to pull out all the blessings in our lives and just throw it on the canvas today, putting that front and center, not magnifying our current struggles and trials. And now I'll start pulling in some orange into that about here. So about halfway on the bird, a little higher than that. And when I do that, I'll just blend up. I'll even go back in with my yellow and kind of blend that in a little bit more. I'm just gonna dab my brush off, take off a little bit of that darker paint, and just blend that while it's still wet. And go back to my dark orange again, get around that branch and around those little claws. Now I want to make a quick note here. These colors that we're using for the background and many of the other ones we mix up throughout this tutorial, I go back to for touch-ups at the very end. And I know that might seem crazy. How could acrylic stay damp that long? Especially if you're only able to separate this tutorial into different painting sessions. So what I do and recommend, I use either aluminum foil to cover up my paint palette or saran wrap. Between sessions, I'll even give it a spritz with some water. So not only make sure you mix up enough of these colors, but also keep them damp. And my method for covering up my paint palette will keep the paint wet for about 3, sometimes 4 days. Now, I missed a spot. There is this little gap between the feet. It's just a tiny little spot that we need to cover up with our orange. I discovered this later, but while you've got this on your brush, why not paint it in now? Next, we'll paint in the branch. I'll use raw umber and a little bit of black. We'll need enough for our sides. That's raw umber and some black. I will use my filbert brush for this, my size 2 filbert brush. Make sure it's clean and damp, and I'll just work around those little feet and along my sides. Now, all this started for me painting animals about 7 years ago when I was deep in addiction, anxiety, and depression. Little did I know that it would become a tool that would help me tremendously through recovery. And through the process, I've learned so much about pet and wildlife acrylic art. So this is why I'm sharing it with hurting creatives who need an outlet, who need support, and they'd like to master pet and wildlife acrylic art. So all within the masterclass, I have a pet portrait commission course. I have a creative color painting guide. I've added over 200 cheerful, colorful pet and wildlife acrylic painting tutorials, all of which come with class notes summarizing the techniques and color methods that I demonstrated and explained in detail in the tutorial, a list of materials, reference photos, a traceable or drawing instructions built into the video. Not to mention breed-specific tutorials going over my 12-step pet portrait painting process, and I'm also working on, it's in progress, a master animal fur painting guide which should be done within the next month or two. So if this would bless you or a friend, I have links to the masterclass down below. But guys, let's get back to painting this tree branch. You can see this is not straight. This definitely has a lot of bumps. Now, I have a tendency to work lightning fast. It's just my pace, and your pace may be quite different, and that's okay. So feel free to use the pause or play button on your screen. And remember, there's no comparison. We're here to play, we're here to learn, and we're here to reduce stress. Now I'm seeing some real thin spots that the paint could be a bit thicker. So after I paint in the sides, I'll go over it with another layer. So I'm adding some fluorescent pink to my paint palette. And I'll use this to paint the feet, the face, and then we'll also be using it for the feathers later. So I'll not use my palette knife for this. I'm just going to mix up a little bit of white and even less of my fluorescent pink to keep this a very light pink with my size 1 round brush. And we'll just carefully paint in this area around the eye. Now I'm going to just pick up a tiny little bit of my fluorescent pink to paint in here, I see that there's just a little bit of a shadow, just slight shadow here. So I'm going to use this fluorescent pink, blending it into that light pink, and it kind of goes in towards the eye. And now next I'll use that lighter pink that we made and I'll just fill in the feet. Now just a little reminder, we'll need this color in a little bit again, so make sure you keep it damp or mix up some more and paint around those claws. So we have two toes that we can see right here, and it goes down to little claws. And then we have two toes as well here. I'm just going to mix up some more because I'm running out. And what I'm going to do a very similar technique that I did up here. I'll take some of my pink to separate these toes and to create a bit more of a shadow on the inside, is I'll just pull in that fluorescent pink in. I'll just blend this darker pink into our light pink that we added, just getting those shadows right at the top of the feet, around the toes, separating the toes. Next, we're going to work on that beak. So I'll just use easy grays there. Dark gray, I'll start with my dark gray using lots of black, a little bit of white. All right, so let's first just outline the beak. I'm going to outline the top one first because we have a bit of a highlight on the bottom here. So I'm going to focus on the top of the beak, carefully going around that point. And then back down around the bottom of the beak. And then up top, it kind of comes down to a point and then curves around like that. All right, so I'm going to fill in this area of the beak and up to about there. And the same with the bottom of the beak. I will start with the bottom and work up, leaving some white just like I did up here, but then we're going to add in some white on our paint palette, mix in some white so we make a lighter gray, blend that up where we're getting some more light there. And I'll use that same gray to fill in this bottom area below on the bottom of the beak. And even more white because the top of the beak right here on the side is getting the most amount of light. And as well as right up here. I really want to exaggerate that smile. I'm going to curve it up just so you can tell That little guy is happy. And the last thing I'll do with that beak is go on with straight black right here at the bottom. Make that more of a point and darken it up a bit too. Just make sure that's a really nice curve. And while we're working on our darks, I should say our dark grays, our blacks, and I'm going to work on the eyes and then nostril. So I'll be switching to a much smaller brush. I'll switch to my 4-0 spot brush. And with just black, I'll fill in that nostril. And I'll fill in that pupil and then outline the eye. Now, whenever you're doing tiny, tiny details like this, you need very little water and paint on your detail brushes. So take your time here, keep that hand as steady as you can. But if you're a little shaky, no biggie. It's acrylics, you can just paint over it once it's dried. You can tell I love my fluorescent colors and my pastel colors. I'm adding Fluorescent Blue to my paint palette. And I'm gonna mix up, where's my palette knife? Fluorescent Blue and some white. Get that a nice medium value blue. I love this blue. And then for those darker areas, I'm going to mix up violet with my phthalo blue. Scooch this over a little bit. That's violet and phthalo blue, equal parts. And I will add a bit of white to that as well. Really pull out those yellows, so add a good amount of violet. I would say there's a little bit more violet than blue here. Wonderful. So first what I'm going to do, how I like to do my feathers here, I'm going to grab my flat brush, size 6. I'm going to add a thin layer. So I will just add the smallest bit more water, leave it on my brush, grab some of this blue, and add a thin layer over top my feathers here. So I'm going to not focus on this area or this area, just the head down along the belly. I still want to be able to see, so I'm not adding this too thick. I still want to see my sketch behind here so that I can go in with my darker indigo. So if you're having trouble seeing it, add some more water to your paint. Now this is called a wash. It's a technique that basically gives some color, some base coat as your first layer before we start adding all the other colors. You can also add this technique to add a tint of a color over top layers you've already added. Let's say you want to make an area a little bit darker or a little bit more yellow or more brown. This wash technique is lovely. Now the reason I apply this technique when I'm painting feathers is because I've noticed when I was painting each individual feather, it was taking ages. But this gives it a base coat, almost kind of like we add a gesso layer before applying paint over top. It's just more efficient. I'm also not losing the sketch, and I can just block in, have a base, kind of help me figure out colors and where to place them, then go over top this and add in each detailed feather with its own color. Now, things that can make this a little tricky is one, if you're using a very soft pencil, it can just start coming into your paint. So I recommend like a 4H pencil. Also, you want to add enough water that you can see through the paint so it's thin enough, but not too much water that it's way too watered down, dripping off your canvas, and the paint is not adhering to the canvas. All right, so we'll do the exact same thing with this color, watering it down a bit on this part and that side of the wing. Now, the more dominant the color, the more you'll have to add water to it or even a bit of white. You got to get that thin so we don't lose all our sketch below it. See, if I go like that with my finger, that'll even take off some of that paint. And again on this side too. A little bit trickier. You might need a detail brush for this. I think I can get away with it with just using the corner of my brush. All right, so then using this indigo, I'm going to go in with this is my size 1 round brush, I'm going to get those toenails, those little claws. We got 4 sharp claws here, which I'll pull down, give it a slight curve at the end, cutting into our orange background. All right, now a fun little design that I want to add with my size 1 round brush are little dots throughout the feet. We see that in the reference photo, but it almost kind of looks like scales, and I'm just going to make it a little bit more simple, a little bit more fun. I'll use my 4-0 spot brush again and just go all around the feet with these little dots, about the same width apart, same size too. So I'll try to focus on one toe, 1 foot at a time, clustering these dots together. It really helps to separate each toe using these dots that are more tightly clustered together in one area, creating rows of dots on each individual toe. And now we'll start with this toe on this foot. And if you have any dots that don't look quite right, maybe they're smudged a little bit, you can go over it with that fluorescent pink and white mixture we made and go around and touch it up. I'm even going to touch up some of those claws and to bring them out a little bit more. All right, so next we're going to outline every single little feather. It's definitely going to take some time with this indigo that we made. And then we'll make it even darker to outline these feathers on the wing. So for this, I recommend either a 3-0 round brush or the liner brush here. This is size 0 liner brush. I think I might alternate between the two. I'll start with this one on these really small stubby feathers around the head, and then as I work down, I might go to this larger one. So I'm going to make it clean and damp, and I'm only going to add just a little bit of paint to the tip of my brush. I'm not going to fill my entire brush, and I'll just work down and around. Now this is the fun part, gliding that paint in these curves, these like open C's that almost look like shingles on a roof. And we're going to carefully do this within the bird and also carefully curving into the background. It's going to be cutting slightly into the background so we don't have the blue touching the yellow, but instead this indigo. Now we're just working over the light blue area. Take note to the size and direction of the feather. They are much shorter, smaller around the head, then get a little bit bigger, longer around the neck, and much larger, more full feathers around the stomach. Now, something to pay attention to is how much paint is on your brush. Any paint that's drying to your brush will make your lines much thicker. It'll be hard to move the paint around on your canvas or paper. So you just want to regularly wash off your brush in the cup of water. When you start to feel that pulling or sticking, and then you pick up a small amount of paint, this way we can really define each individual feather. Now you'll see coming up, there's a few little feathers that I cut into that wing on. All right, so we're going to take a little intermission here. So any of you who are maybe falling behind, you can catch up or do any touch-ups to the feathers if you'd like. Take a little break, get up and stretch, and then we'll get started on those wings. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of this and add in lots more of my violet and phthalo blue. I want to make this darker for the darker parts of the wing, outlining those feathers. Okay, and we're going to get a lot of these shadows up here that are showing that the feathers are kind of sticking out and up. And I'll go to the same brush I was using, my size 3-0 round brush. Now, I recommend you watch me first before painting it yourself. These feathers are a bit more complex. The feathers that are sticking up, I'm going to start with those first. I want to block in the shadows between feathers at the top and then work my way down towards those longer feathers. We only see the sides of the top feathers, so they're going to be real thin and skinny. I'll still be cutting into that yellow and orange area with this color, just like we did with over top the light blue feathers. You may have already noticed that the traceable that I gave you, I have a lot more guidance on feathers. But if you're still having troubles figuring out where the feathers are and where the shadows lie, you can still fill in a lot of areas. You can be a bit more intuitive here, but you can fill in as much indigo as you'd like because we can add in feathers later. Now I'm getting a little bit longer feathers here, and where this area meets, I add in just a tiny little feather just so it's not such a random feather going in one direction. But ever so carefully, we want to pull these feathers down, get a little bit thinner, a little bit longer. Now, if you're still working, take your time, but I will be outlining the feathers on the opposite wing. We don't have many to paint in, but we still have a few. All right, so next I'm going to mix up a darker violet for these feathers over here. I will mix up violet with white, pretty simple. And I want to have more violet, keeping this dark. It's pretty easy to keep violet dark. It takes a lot of white to lighten that up. All right, and we'll paint the darker feathers down here. I'll use a bit larger brush. I just love my size 1 round brush. I use this brush more than any other brush. And I'm going to use this violet we just mixed up to paint these lower feathers. Now we're really going to start adding vibrant color to these feathers, starting with the wings. Now this purple is not quite dark enough. In a little bit you'll see I add more violet to it. And what we want to do with these feathers is where they overlap, it creates a shadow. That's where we want it the darkest. That's going to be the tricky balance that we're trying to keep here, creating one end darker where it's overlapping one feather, and then the opposite end of the shadow, keeping it lighter, but keeping that area in between nicely blended, so it's this nice transition from dark to light. Now, I really like to keep things tidy in my art, so I'm not going to paint outside of our outline. I'm going to paint within it, even trying not to go over that outline as best I can. All right, so then I'll start adding some more white to this violet as we move our way up. So anytime I'm mixing colors, I like to take a corner of it so I'm not taking up all that color in case I want to go back to it. And in a corner of that purple, I added in more white. We're going to paint the row of feathers above now. Now, before the feathers that are dark purple below this dry, on the ends of those feathers, where it's not underneath any feathers but over top, that's where we want it to be outlined on the ends of those. Just creating this curve, outlining the bottom of each of these feathers. All right, so now I'll work up, finishing off that row of feathers where I left off, and even going up to the feathers above that too. Now, this seems a bit odd because we're going to be skipping a whole bunch of feathers and moving all the way at the top with this lighter violet. Bear with me, this will make sense in a little bit. But first, I'm going to outline the very top feathers where we're only seeing the sides. I'll also add in feathers below those, and then we'll move down to the feathers below that, but only working in the area where it meets and overlaps with the other feather, not on the end of the feathers. That will leave for a lighter color that we'll paint in later. So here I go, carefully painting in the feathers, but leaving the outer rim of the small and large feathers so we can go in with a pink in a little bit. I'll do the same thing on these feathers using this lighter violet. And because this row is actually getting quite little light, I'm going to go even darker with that and add that to the tops like we were doing. So just go a bit darker with this violet. And where the feathers overlap, I'll add this so it's about halfway on each feather. And you can't see a whole lot on this side. That violet we applied is actually dark enough. I might just go up just a little bit on this one. Now I want to blend some of my lighter violet in with that darker violet so it's this smooth transition from dark to light. I don't want it to look as blocky, so I'll go back to our original violet and blend those two areas together. Now we're really going to build with these colors here. Now into this lighter violet, I'm actually just going to pull some over here. I'm going to add my favorite color. This is the Fluorescent Pink and white. I actually don't even think I need that much violet. I think I'm going to pull this aside and add even more fluorescent pink. Oops, and some white. Now, hopefully your pink isn't as dry and sticky as mine, but I want lots of pink and white and a little bit of that violet. So this becomes more of a magenta. All right, so here's another spot where I recommend you watch me first before giving it a try yourself. I'm going to paint the tops, ends of these feathers inside the outline, but not completely covering up the inside purple layers that we've added. They're an upwards C. They kind of go about halfway up the feather. Now I'll focus on this upward C on the rounder, shorter feathers first, then we'll create a different design on the thinner, longer feathers. All right, so here we go. I'm going to be creating a line on the far right of the inside of the thinner, longer feathers. Just a thin strip that cuts down along the inner right of each feather. And then I'll add some more violet into that for the bottom feathers. Now these feathers are not getting as much light, so they need to be darker, but I'll still apply that strip on the inner right. And then I'll go back to the other side and just add a tiny little bit of my pink highlights or magenta highlights to those feathers. Now take your time if you're still mixing and applying colors to this wing. I am going to do some touch-ups though. There's a few little top feathers that I left, so I'll go back to my pinks, just a few feathers that I overlooked. And by the way, if there's any feathers that you want to add different colors to, you don't just have to do pink. By all means, go for it. Make this your own. All right, so next what we're going to do is mix up a lighter blue than the base that we applied at the beginning, that wash. So my fluorescent blue, I'm going to add that to some white. Now with this much lighter blue than what we applied to the base, so it really needs to have a lot of white because that was such a thin base coat, I'm going to go in the inner outer border of the feathers. So not where it overlaps with the other feathers above, but the outer border on the inside. Use any brush you're more comfortable with. We want to keep this real thin, detailed line that's even throughout, and we'll just be working on over the light blue feathers on the head and body. I will tell you though, this blue is actually not quite light enough. In a little bit, I mix up a whole separate pile with lots more white. We want this to be much lighter. All right, so this is my favorite part. We're gonna work from bottom up with all the different rainbow colors. We're gonna start with, I'm gonna add permanent red, and then that will lead into an orange. So we need permanent red and orange if you don't have it on your paint palette. I'm just simply gonna mix up red with a little bit of orange, just so it's not straight red. I don't wanna just take it straight out of the bottle. So that's red with orange, and I'm gonna try and make the width of, these changes in color about the same. Now how I'm gonna paint in each feather is above the light blue highlight and within where the dark blue outline of feathers join. An image that came to mind when I'm painting these is a watermelon that has a few bites taken out of it. So using any color you'd like, you don't have to follow this rainbow pattern that I am if you don't want to. We'll paint our little watermelons from the bottom up. This looks a little dark to me, so I'm actually going to add some white and some more orange to this red. Just a little too dark. Now little feathers like this where you barely see any of it, I'm just going to create a small little strip there. So it's not like this huge gap without color. All right, so I'll go about this much higher with this color, and then we'll move to our orange. All right, so I'm gonna wash up my brush and I'm gonna mix up orange with some white. Oh, my orange is almost dry. Yep, I need to get more orange. So that's orange with a bit of white. Now, first of all, I want to remind you this is an abstract, fun painting. So we're here to learn and have fun. We don't have to make things perfect, precise, realistic. Just enjoy yourself, working on one feather at a time with our orange. Now, on that point, I'll give you a little heads up. I decide to later mix up another orange that's even more vibrant and cheerful. It's Fluorescent Pink with Cadmium Yellow. Now, if you want to continue on with this orange, go for it. Otherwise, that's Fluorescent Pink with Cadmium Yellow, and I end up applying another layer over top this orange in a little bit. All right, and for the next color, we'll do yellow. So I'm going to mix cadmium yellow with white. Now don't forget, make sure you have enough of these colors so we can go back and do touch-ups later. Now here's my secret behind adding this rainbow pattern to bird feathers. Not only do I fill in another strip of color above the orange now, but I'll take those previous colors and scatter them over top the previous color and some of the feathers so that it's this nice blend. So while that orange is still wet, I'll take some of this yellow, pick a few of the orange feathers and blend in this yellow into a few of them. I'll also go back to my orange with the red, add in a few of the orange over top some of the red so it blends. It's a nice way to connect the feathers in color. So here I go, picking a few of the top orange feathers that are closest to the row of yellows and blending this yellow into those oranges. And next into our greens. So for our greens, we want to keep this light because we don't want to go from a darker to a lighter then back to a darker one. So this needs to be pretty darn light. So into that yellow that we just made, I'll add more white, more yellow, and a hint of blue, Phthalo Blue. It's that fine line between you don't want to add too much blue or else it turns too dark in value, but you also want to make sure you have enough blue so it doesn't still look like yellow. So be careful adding a pinhead amount of paint at a time. Next, I'll mix up Fluorescent Blue, Phthalo Blue just a little bit, and white. These need to be light, but a darker blue than the blues we've already added to this area of the bird. So that's Fluorescent Blue, white, and a little bit of Phthalo Blue. Now, originally, I thought at this point I would just continue on the rest of the head and neck with this blue. But then I come to see that I really want to add some more violet. So I'm going to continue on up a little bit further with this blue. I'll scatter them even more widespread around the head, and then we'll mix up our purple. And I'm going to sneak some violet in there. So I'm going to go back to this color, but if you need to mix it back up again, we'll just do our violet with white. That's violet and white, keeping it a medium violet. Now, if you watch me here, I'll be working around that face with this medium value violet, but I'll also be applying some over top the blue, so it mixes and creates an indigo. I might have gone down a little too far with the violet, so I'll go back to my light blue in a little bit. right, so I'm going to wash with my brush and go back to my blue and bring that into the violet a little bit more. And even down into some of those greens. Now we have a shadow being created from this wing over top these feathers here. What I'm actually going to do is mix up some Phthalo Blue and white. That's Phthalo Blue and white. Now this blue that I test out is actually a little on the dark side, so I add in more white to it to lighten it up. Now art is just one big fun experiment. It took me a few testings to figure out what kind of design I wanted to create this shadow, but I'm not entirely covering up these feathers beneath the wing, only partially. Just the row of feathers that line the bottom of the wing. These are the feathers that I'm going to get with this medium value blue. Not too dark, also not too light. And I want to pull out those beautiful pinks in these feathers on this side. So I'm going to take some fluorescent pink with some white. Not going to add any violet this time. Lots of fluorescent pink. Now, unlike the layer of magenta that we added to this wing, these feathers, I'll be a bit more loose with my brushstrokes here. It's lighter, it's looser, and I'm not entirely covering up the previous magenta or the violet layers. I'm only partially covering this outer edge of the inside of the feathers. Now I'll work my way down this left wing. I'll even bring it over top those thinner, longer feathers, creating even thinner, more precise strips, highlights that go in the inner right of those feathers. I'm going to mix this with a little bit of my light violet mixture to get down here. And I am going to keep that eyeball white. I'm going to go in with just straight white, so it's not just left plain white canvas. Now this eye in comparison to the body is so small, so it's very easy to get that white over top the black outline or the pupil. So while we're here, let's go touch that up with black. Now I just love this background, but acrylic paint always dries darker than what we're seeing it. So I loved how vibrant it was when it was wet, but I want to go in and add a little bit more yellow to it. I actually have this same color here. That was a little bit of orange, white, and the cadmium yellow. I'm going to pull that and grab more cadmium yellow and more white. And then add that very loosely. This is a very damp brush, so it's just going to spread nicely a thin layer over top the background. This just pulls out those violets even more. Blending is a challenge, but don't fight it. Why not have a few brushstrokes showing? So two things I see is I want to brighten up those greens. I want them just to be more vibrant. And I also want to lighten up these oranges, just so that it's not such a shocking bright yellow. And I'll add a great orange that I just love making is with Fluorescent Pink and Cadmium Yellow. It makes such a beach orange that I can't get enough of, and I'll add more white to that. My colors are all mixing here. Let's try this again. That's cadmium yellow with fluorescent pink and some white. I'll even pull some into a little bit of those blues. Bringing some of this orange down into the reds, kind of like scattered, not perfectly even line of orange feathers. Let's try this bright aqua green. I'm going to add this over top these greens. I'm going to add more yellow to it to make it more green. Oh yeah, this is going to be it. Now, just like I did with the orange section of feathers, I'm going to replace the green ones we currently have with this vibrant lime green looking turquoise. And I'll also pull it over more to the left into some of those blue darker feathers. Now, I love green, but I often shy away from it, just not really knowing how to use it. And I've been trying to break out of that, which is why I'm going to scatter some more green up into those blues, not going too crazy. And then I'll even pull in some yellows up into this while it's wet. And that permanent red mixture for the bottom row of feathers, I added white to that. I'm going to go back to it and fill in a few more to the left where I added more blue than I need. I'm going to try and find a spot for raw sienna. Got it right there. And I'm going to mix up raw sienna with a bit of orange and white. So that's raw sienna, orange, and white. Now, once again, we're not following the rules. I'm going to make up my own design of texture on the tree branch, creating a set of wavy lines going in this horizontal direction along the branch on the left and right sides of the feet. Some are connected, some are separate and on its own. Using my size 2 Arteza filbert brush, keeping the width about the same with each line. And I don't want to go all the way to the outside of the branch, I'm just staying within it. And then touch-up time, I'll just go around with some touch-ups, going back to my dark blue violet, and I'll just do some touch-ups where I went over some of the feathers. I'm just carefully re-outlining the individual feathers, and I especially want to use this dark indigo to create a bit more shadows under the beak on the far left of the neck. Now those feathers that are below the left wing, I want to capture that shadow, so I'll also focus this indigo on those feathers as well. Now I'm going to outline the very bottom in between the feet with my dark indigo, as well as the bottom of the other wing. But I'll also add in a bit more of our lighter indigo mixture that we used to outline the wing feathers. So you'll actually see in a moment that I cover up some of those pinks and purples on that opposite wing. Alright creatives, thank you so much for watching. I really hope this tutorial blessed you. If it did, be sure to like and subscribe for more animal art acrylic painting tutorials, how-to videos, and in the comments down below, let me know if there's any pets or wildlife you'd like me to paint. Have a wonderful day. Bye!